Water dripped through the cracks in the bitter dungeon. Torches held mysterious blue flames that gave out a chilling freeze, numbing everything they touched. A musty smell of mould and cold shivered all around, lingering in the air like death. Snakes littered the floor, tongues flicking from dark shadows, trying to find their prey. In the middle of the cave was a table. Lying on top of it was a woman, panic-stricken and confused. Questions spread through her mind, all of which led to the same man, the only one who possessed the answers. Why would he do this? What was his intent? The snakes coiled like ropes around her wrists and ankles, binding them. As she tried to move, the serpents hissed, angry at being disturbed. Her blue eyes made contact with the infinite black eyes of the snakes, which pierced her soul with deadly hatred. The victim watched her breath escape, coming out like hurried gasps of smoke. She knew what they were, why they despised her. They were Keahi, and she was the reason why their master grieved. The woman dared not move for fear they would infect her with their deadly poison, despite the fact she was trying to tell herself he would never let anything harm her. It was hard not to squirm when the snakes wrapped around her with more intensity, the determination cutting off the blood supply to her hands and feet, restricting her sight, and forbidding her to hear anything above the thumping of blood pulsating in her ears. So she didn't see as one of the snakes slithered along the floor towards the table. The woman couldn't hear as it made its way up the table leg. Excitement from the sickly show was arousing the snakes that bound her prisoner. The time had come to dispel of their king's one weakness. They hissed eagerly in her ear. She breathed in and held it as the sensation of a serpent crawling along her body electrified her nerves. Its tongue smelled, tasted her skin. It crept onto her face. Its tongue licked her lips. Another snake slithered along her arm, bit down, hard, drawing blood and delivering poison as a substitute into her veins. The woman's veins and arteries throbbed as her heart beat venom around her system. A voice slashed through the agony, broke through the barrier of blood still pounding in her ears, a voice which dripped in deceit. "Aka," the woman said under her breath, finding her throat was sore and harsh. She felt a numbing sensation and again came to wonder why he was letting them do this to her. It was no secret that he still loved her. They both knew that. The scar still glowed vibrantly where he had tried to cut it out of him, knowing for the sake of his people that he couldn't allow himself to give in to the feelings. Trouble was he already had, and in doing so Aka had caused great grief for all his family. They'd had a son together, and, though she didn't want to believe it, him catching her was surely a sign that Aka now relished the power that would be a marvellous asset to winning the war between their two people. The prospect his son had of near indestructibility. Caleb would be 12 years old now. Aka needed his son, before he came into his teens, to capture the unused mind of an innocent and the fragile imagination held at his age, before it crumbled. Liliana tried to swallow, but with fright she realised that her windpipe had narrowed. Torment filled her soul as deprivation of oxygen spread through her body. Her breathing became shallow and started to haul out of her. She dimly noticed a man whose eyes shone tensely back as bottomless pools of darkness in deeply tanned skin. Threat and sorrow seemed to rise off him. He was tall, 6'4" in fact, exactly half an inch higher than she was. He was dressed in a long black coat and trousers. His hair hung limply down just past his shoulders and shone a dangerous black. She knew hidden beneath it, on the nape of his neck, was a tattoo of a circle with a dot in the middle, the symbol that represented his status in the Keahi land, the symbol of a king. Another tattoo was printed on the inside of his right wrist, which mirrored that of her pendant. His whole essence reeked of emotional turmoil. Liliana wheezed and averted her gaze, suffocating anguish in replacement of the inescapable knowledge that he was the cause of all this, someone who had been so gracious to her, so gentle. But the truth had given him away. He had used her as well as loved her. She wanted to cry as she thought back to all those times when it was just her and him, alone and free in each other's arms. "Please look at me." The sound was deep and entrancing, with a sharp edge, the same as it had been when they first met. It reminded Liliana of all the goodness that had once been so vivid and extraordinary. But now it also brought connotations of the deception that he had woven through her, using words to hypnotize. Look where they were now. It meant nothing. It meant everything. She moved her eyes as he passed his hand gently over her throat, a fingering black a thin black-green smoke coming out of his palm, highlighted with a sparkling bright white light, and suddenly she could breathe properly again. She drew in as much air as she could in one gulp, not caring that it tasted contaminated and vile in the stench of lies. She looked into the man's piercing black pupils. Sadness swept over her as she remembered how it had been when she was ignorant of his true identity. Akka saw Liliana's sorrow reflected in her eyes, and put her finger delicately to her cold lips. He shivered slightly and whispered, "I need you." Her lips began to tingle as the paralysis wore off, and she managed a feeble word. "Why?" "I love you. That is why." She could smell his breath spilling out of him as he spoke. It had an aroma of mint, but then he continued, saying something that made her heart stop, made her throat feel as if it were closing up again, and she reeled upon hearing the unbearable. "And I have to see my son. I cannot let him become associated with a Haukea." Tears fell from Liliana's eyes, drop by drop, welling up, then falling, merging into one another as they dripped down her cheeks. She felt them soften her lips as they came into her mouth. She tasted the salty sorrow, and knew their son would never have the life she sought for him if she granted this request. She wanted to scream at Akka, to shout, to cry out loud. She wanted to jump up and hit him, suffocate him, so that her son wouldn't have the pressure of knowing what he was. She acknowledged that she was a liar now, but only a whisper could pass her lips, and so she focused her blurry vision onto Akka, expelling through her eyes all the hate and anger she felt towards him at this point. And for a second the two pairs of eyes made contact. Then it was gone, lost forever. But it gave enough information to tell Akka that he would never get his true love back, and it was enough for Liliana to see her forbidden love's secret and happiness, to realize that Akka had lost someone who meant more to him than any war. She felt ashamed of herself that she thought otherwise. Her husband wanted their son to be detached from this war as much as she. The only difference was that he was not blinded enough to think this would be possible. When he spoke again, more softly, less compelling, she listened with more respect. "You cannot keep his inheritance a secret forever, Flower. You know what the Haukea are like. They will find his power and make them their own. I'm sorry, but I intend to breach your trust by trying to find him. However, I'm afraid, Flower. Who knows what will become of our world with power like Caelim's?" Liliana gasped back her tears. "What?" he asked. She couldn't answer him. The truth was too painful for them both to have to handle. She dreaded his reaction to it, just as Akka had been afraid of her reaction to his in life all those years ago. It killed her to think what she had to do, what she had done, but at the same time she thought she had no choice in the matter. She was broken and fearful. The Haukea would execute her in their mission to get her son, and if Caelim were taken to Haukea, her own world, without her, what protection and guidance would he have against building an allegiance with a group which brought so much misery to so many people? And with the information that Akka was to find and take her son, she had to take action. So with sincere regret she began to whisper the spell that would allow her to see her son. Her eyes closed as she went into a comatose state. She saw her son, and reached out to him as he grabbed her. However, before she could finish, Akka quickly put his hand over her mouth, the uncertainty of what she was doing scaring him. "I thought you were against them now," he shouted in shock. Blackness seeped into Liliana's mouth. She became half-conscious, but was determined to finish what she had started. There was no time to explain, and bit down hard into Akka's hand. He yelled at her, feeling the cold pain crystallizing his hand. He clutched it to make the pain more bearable, and a drop of frozen blood fell from it to the floor, where it shattered next to one of the serpents. Its hiss was filled with the need to protect its master. The snakes that were scattering the floor started to crawl up the table legs surreptitiously and slide over Liliana's body. One of them lunged at her skin, passing more venom into her system. Sharp pains erupted over her whole body as they pierced her flesh with deadly fangs. She saw the magic spilling out of her in great blue and purple lights. The snakes raised their heads, droplets of venom and blood descending from their drenched fans, staining Liliana's pure white skin crimson. She watched the connection fading between her and her son, their hands unclenched, creeping away from each other through numerous unseen cracks. She felt him, her son, leaving, his soul full of emotion, could hear his frightened thoughts. Akka had done something to the connection when he had woken her, and something was not right. She knew her son would soon come into contact with the war he should never have been conscious of. The remaining lights floated above her and disappeared through the ceiling, and she was gone as she joined them. Akka cried, his scar still showing vibrantly where he had been told to cut out his love for her. But he couldn't. He just couldn't.